She wasn't supposed to be noticed. That was the point. Yet the silence that followed her arrival told a different story. Men shifted in their seats. Eyes flicked over, then away, then back again. Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table, as if her chair had been set a little too close to the wall, a little too far from the center? The commander's voice cut across the room, clipped and steady, outlining grids, times, coordinates. His words fell like sharp pins on a map, but her mind wandered, hovering above every detail. She wasn't distracted, not exactly. She was waiting for the one piece of information they hadn't said aloud yet. The one detail that might explain why she, of all people, had been pulled into this mission at the last moment. Her hand rested on the folder in front of her, a plain folder with the thinnest packet of intel she had ever seen. 2 photographs, a single satellite image, a list of names incomplete with half the lines blacked out. Not much to go on, but enough to tell her this wasn't routine. She could feel the weight of silence pressing against her ribs, heavier than the words filling the air. She didn't shift, didn't fidget, didn't raise her eyes to meet the men who tried not to stare. The truth was, she was used to this. Used to being seen as a guard for show, a presence to tick some quiet box, until the moment came when she was. "Any questions?" the commander asked. His gaze passed over her like a beam of light that refused to land. She thought of raising her hand, asking the question that burned at the edge of her throat. But she didn't. Instead, she pressed her palm harder against the folder and let the silence answer for her. No one in that room knew what she carried with her. The hours on rooftops in foreign cities. The cold nights where her trigger finger froze before her thoughts did. The names she remembered, not the names of enemies, but the names of people she couldn't save. And the one name she had never spoken aloud, not since the day she left home. When the briefing ended, chairs scraped, boots scuffed, and voices rose. The men filed out in loose groups, their camaraderie stitched together with jokes and curses. She remained seated. She needed a moment, needed to breathe in the air of this room, to trace the edges of the map still projected on the wall, because somewhere in those lines and numbers was the truth. And she had to find it. The hallway outside echoed with hurried footsteps. Radios crackled. The hum of machinery pulsed through the floor. She walked slowly, deliberately, her boots striking with the rhythm of restraint. Outside, daylight struck her eyes. She squinted, the sudden brightness forcing her into the present. Vehicles lined the compound, engines idling. Dust swirled in low spirals with every movement of air. She caught sight of him then, the man they called Harris. Not a rank, not a title, just a name. He leaned against a vehicle, arms crossed, posture relaxed but eyes sharp. He was watching her, not in the way the others did, not curious, not dismissive, watching as though he knew something she didn't. "You don't talk much," he said when she approached. She adjusted the strap across her shoulder. "Not much to say." "Funny," he replied, "given what they say about you." Her eyes narrowed, but only slightly. "And what do they say?" "That you don't miss." The words landed heavier than he intended. She looked away, scanning the compound, watching the movements of soldiers preparing gear, tightening straps, loading weapons. Each gesture carried purpose. Each sound folded into a chorus of readiness. And yet, beneath it all, she felt the hollow thrum of uncertainty. They weren't ready, not really. She turned back to Harris. "Everyone misses," she said quietly. He tilted his head, considering her words, but he didn't argue. The convoy rolled out an hour later. Dust rose behind them, clinging to the air like a shadow. Inside the vehicle, the hum of the engine filled the silence. No one spoke. She sat near the back, her rifle case resting against her knees, her hand resting lightly on its edge. Her breathing was steady, but her heart tapped an uneven rhythm, one she couldn't quite smooth out. Outside the window, the landscape stretched endlessly, barren hills, scattered trees, the illusion of peace. But she knew better. Peace here was like smoke. It looked solid from afar, but vanished the moment you reached for it. A soldier across from her cleared his throat. Young, Too young, perhaps. He glanced at her, then quickly away. His hands fidgeted with the strap of his vest. She recognized the signs, not fear exactly, but the anticipation of it. "First time?" she asked softly. He nodded, surprised she spoke. His lips parted, then closed again as though searching for the right words. Finally, "Yeah." She gave the smallest of smiles. "You'll remember the silence more than the noise." He frowned, not understanding, but he would. One day he would. The road grew rougher. The vehicle jolted, tires grinding against gravel. Radios hissed with clipped words. Then a pause, a stillness, the kind that doesn't belong. She lifted her gaze. Through the windshield, the path ahead stretched empty, too empty. Her hand moved instinctively to her rifle case. She didn't speak, didn't need to, because in that fragile silence everyone felt it, the sudden heaviness of air, the tension that crept under skin. And then it came, not the blast, not yet, but the sound, the faintest metallic click carried on the wind. Her eyes locked on Harris, who sat 2 rows ahead. He heard it too. His body stiffened, his hand moving toward his weapon. But it was too late. The explosion tore through the earth ahead of them, a surge of fire and dust and noise that swallowed the sky. The vehicle slammed to a halt, bodies thrown forward, ears ringing with the roar of chaos. Shouts erupted, orders tangled with screams. The acrid scent of smoke clawed at her throat. She grabbed her rifle, forcing the case open, her movements sharp and certain. Her vision tunneled, blocking out the confusion, narrowing only to what mattered. Through the haze, figures moved, shadows breaking from the hills, darting with practiced speed. She raised her rifle, pressed it to her shoulder, and let her breathing slow. 1 beat, 2. The first shot rang out, clean and sharp, cutting through the noise. A figure fell, but others surged forward. Her mind split, part focused on the mechanics of aim and fire, the rhythm of precision, the dance of trigger and breath. The other part drifted, pulled backward in time to another explosion, another convoy, another day when she had been too far, too slow. The memory pressed hard, blinding for a moment. She shook it off. Not now, not here. Her shots echoed, each one carving a path through the chaos. Around her, soldiers scrambled, returning fire, dragging the wounded to cover. Harris barked commands, his voice carrying above the storm. And through it all, she remained steady. Until she was. The young soldier, the one she had spoken to, stumbled near the edge of the vehicle, his face pale, his vest scorched. His eyes locked on hers, wide with something between fear and pleading. She moved before she thought, sliding low, dragging him back, shielding his body with hers as another burst tore through the air. The impact rattled her bones, but she held firm, pulling him to safety. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice rough, almost a command. He nodded weakly, his breath ragged. Blood pooled at his side, dark and stubborn. Her throat tightened, but she forced it down, forced herself to keep moving, to press her hand against the wound, to anchor him to this moment. Around them, the firefight raged on, but in that instant it felt distant. All she could hear was the sharp inhale and exhale of the boy beside her, the fragile rhythm of life clinging against the storm. And then she heard it, the sound that shifted everything. A single voice, crackling over a radio not theirs. A voice she hadn't heard in years. A voice she thought belonged only to memory. Her hands froze, her breath caught. No, it couldn't be. But it was. And in that moment, she knew this mission wasn't what they told her it was. This was personal. Her fingers trembled just enough for her to notice, not enough for anyone else. She pressed harder against the boy's wound, the sticky warmth seeping into her gloves, but her mind wasn't here anymore. It was on that voice, that impossible voice carried through the radio. She had heard it once before, years ago, on a rooftop she couldn't forget. Back then, it had been softer, calmer, almost reassuring, the voice of someone who once mattered, someone she had sworn never to think of again. But now it was sharper, rougher, commanding. Push forward, box them in. The words cut through the static, through the gunfire, through the screaming. Her chest clenched, her jaw locked. She didn't dare look up, not yet. Not with the boy bleeding beneath her hands, not with her squad fighting for ground. But inside she felt a fracture spreading, like glass under strain. Harris's shout jolted her back. "Cover the left," he pointed, his voice sharp, his eyes demanding. She blinked, forcing the fog to clear. She raised her rifle, braced against the scorched metal of the vehicle, and fired. One target, then another. Her shots carved order out of chaos. Precision, discipline, control. That was her language, that was how she survived. But the voice returned, louder this time, closer. "Don't let them regroup. Drive them out." And suddenly she wasn't hearing orders. She was hearing betrayal. The firefight stretched on, seconds bleeding into minutes. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. Sweat stung her eyes. The air hung heavy with smoke and the acrid taste of burned earth. And still she fired. The boy at her side clung to consciousness. His hand gripped her sleeve weakly, as if that thread of contact tethered him to life. She whispered to him between breaths, words she barely registered, promises she didn't know if she could keep. Finally, the gunfire thinned. The shadows retreated, melting back into the hills. Silence returned, broken only by the moans of the injured and the static of radios searching for clarity. Harris moved among the men, his face grim but steady. He checked wounds, gave orders, steadied hands that shook too much. When his eyes landed on her, he nodded once. Approval, respect maybe, but also a question. Because he had seen it. The way her body stiffened when that voice echoed over the comms. The way her eyes flickered, just for a second, with something that wasn't battle. Later, after the wounded were loaded into evacuation trucks, after the fires were smothered, after the dust began to settle, he found her. She sat alone, rifle across her knees, head tilted back against the side of a battered vehicle. Her gloves were gone. Her hands were bare, streaked with dried blood she hadn't bothered to wash away. "You know something," Harris said quietly, not a question, a statement. She didn't open her eyes. "We all know something." "No," he pressed, "not like that." She drew in a slow breath, then exhaled. "What makes you think I'll tell you?" "Because whatever's eating at you," he said, lowering his voice, "is going to eat at the rest of us if you don't." Finally she looked at him. The late sun cast long shadows across his face, softening the lines but not his eyes. His eyes stayed sharp, steady, relentless. She almost told him, almost. The words brushed the edge of her tongue, heavy, bitter, waiting to spill, but she swallowed them. "Not yet," she whispered. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once as if to say, "Fine, for now." But inside, she felt the weight of the secret pressing harder. That night the camp was quieter than it should have been. No laughter, no easy banter, just the heavy hush of exhaustion and unspoken fear. She lay in her cot, staring at the canvas ceiling above her, listening to the steady breath of those around her. Every inhale, every exhale, a fragile chorus of survival. But she couldn't sleep, not with the voice replaying in her head, that voice, his voice. She remembered the last time she heard it. It had been raining, hard. The city lights blurred against the wet glass of her scope. She was positioned high, steady, waiting. The mission was clear, one shot, one end. The target was a man who had betrayed them all, sold information that cost lives. She had studied his face for days, memorized every angle. And then he appeared, not the target, him. The one person she thought had vanished from her world. The one person she never wanted to see on the wrong side of her scope. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to be with them. But he was, walking side by side with the very man she was ordered to kill. Her finger froze on the trigger. Her chest tightened. And in that pause, that single, breathless pause, everything changed. The target slipped into shadow. The moment was gone. The mission failed. And she never forgave herself. Now, lying in the dark, she realized what the radio had confirmed. He hadn't vanished. He hadn't disappeared into silence. He was here, alive, leading the very forces she had been sent to dismantle. And worse, no one else knew. The dawn came cold and gray. She rose before the others, washed her hands in a basin of water that turned pink before clearing. She stared at her reflection, hollow eyes, lips pressed thin, hair pulled back tight. A mask of control, but inside the fracture spread wider. The orders came at sunrise. They would move again, push deeper into hostile ground, find the source of the ambushes and cut it off before more convoys were lost. She loaded her gear in silence, each piece of metal and fabric heavier than it should have been. Harris watched her again but didn't speak. Not yet. The convoy rolled out, this time slower, more cautious. Every soldier alert, eyes scanning, fingers twitching near triggers. The road stretched endless, the horizon a mirage of heat and dust. She sat in the back again, rifle cradled in her lap. The boy she had saved wasn't with them. He was somewhere far away now, in the hands of medics who would decide his fate. She wondered if he'd remember her words about the silence being louder than the noise. She wondered if he'd survive long enough to understand. Hours passed. The tension thickened. Every bend in the road felt like a trap, every shadow a threat. Sweat trickled down her spine, but her grip stayed steady. And then it came again. The voice, not over the radio this time, but through the air itself, carried on the wind like a ghost. Spread out, don't let them see you grouped. Her breath caught. She recognized the cadence instantly, the way he spoke, the way he commanded. She signaled with a sharp hand gesture. Harris saw it, trusted it, and motioned the convoy to halt. Soldiers fanned out, rifles raised, eyes cutting through the haze. The silence was unbearable. Then a crack of gunfire from the ridge. Bullets snapped past, tearing through canvas and steel. Shouts rose. The ambush had found them again. But this time she wasn't paralyzed. This time she didn't let the past freeze her hand. She slid from the vehicle, dropped low, and sprinted for cover. The ground burned beneath her palms as she crawled into position. She raised her rifle, found her scope, and scanned the ridge. And there he was, clear as daylight. The man she once trusted, the man she once loved, now aiming his weapon directly at her team. Her chest heaved, her throat burned. But her finger didn't move. Not yet. Because in that impossible, fragile second, another memory surged. His hand on hers years ago, steadying her aim. His voice whispering, breathe, always breathe. Her breath faltered. The shot she should have taken slipped away. And she realized this wasn't just war anymore. This was a reckoning. The ridge still smoked with gunfire. Shards of rock splintered with each hit, dust rising like ghosts from the earth. She pressed her cheek to the stock of her rifle, sight fixed on the figure in the distance. Him. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She should have fired already, should have ended it. That was her job. That was the mission. But her finger hovered, frozen, caught between the weight of orders and the weight of memory. He moved with precision, calling out commands to the fighters around him. His gestures were sharp, practiced, familiar. She knew those movements. Once upon a time they had been hers too. They had trained together, fought side by side, shared silence on long nights when the world outside their outpost felt unreal. Now he was the enemy. Take the shot. Harris's voice cut through the chaos, harsh and urgent. Her jaw clenched. She swallowed hard, adjusted her aim, and exhaled. But just as her finger tightened, he turned. His eyes impossibly, undeniably, met hers through the scope. And he smiled. The shock jolted her spine. She gasped just loud enough to hear herself. That fleeting smile wasn't mocking, wasn't cruel. It was recognition. A silent message as if to say, you see me, I see you, and neither of us is ready for this. Her shot went wide, deliberate or instinct, she couldn't tell. The firefight surged. Fighters on the ridge pressed harder, forcing her squad into defensive cover. Harris barked commands, rallying the men, pulling them into formation. But his eyes cut back to her, sharp with suspicion. Later, when the ridge finally fell quiet and the fighters withdrew, leaving only bodies and silence, Harris found her. He didn't yell, he didn't need to. His eyes did the work. "You had him," he said flatly. Her mouth felt dry. "I took the shot." "You missed." Her throat tightened. "It happens." "Not to you." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She wanted to deny it, to push back, to reclaim the armor of indifference. But the truth pressed too close. She turned away, wiping dust from her face, steadying her breath. "We need to regroup." But Harris didn't move. He just stood there, watching her, as if peeling away the layers she fought so hard to keep. That night the squad set up camp in the hollow of a broken hillside. Fires flickered low, casting shadows that danced against stone. The men spoke in hushed tones, their words stitched with exhaustion. Some cleaned weapons, some wrapped wounds, some simply stared into the flames, lost in thoughts too heavy to share. She sat apart, her rifle balanced across her knees. The silence pressed closer than the night air. Every crackle of fire seemed louder than it should be. And her thoughts drifted back to the beginning. She had met him during training. He wasn't supposed to stand out, but he did. Not because he was stronger or louder, but because he listened. He noticed the small things, the way her grip slipped slightly when fatigued, the way her breathing hitched when memories pressed too close. "You hide it well," he had said once, after a long day on the range. She had frowned. "Hide what?" "The weight." She didn't answer then, didn't need to, because he already knew. For a time that knowledge had been a comfort, a lifeline. Until it was. Until he walked away. Now here he was, standing on the wrong ridge, pointing his weapon at the men she was bound to protect. And she couldn't shake the look in his eyes, that fleeting smile that wasn't joy but something else, something dangerous. Harris approached her again, his boots crunching against gravel. He crouched low, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's between you and that man," he said, "but if you hesitate again, people die." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to push him back with sharp words, but he wasn't wrong. So she said nothing. The silence was answer enough. The next morning the squad moved at first light. The air was brittle, the kind of cold that seeped under skin. Their boots crunched against the dry earth, every step a drumbeat of resolve. She scanned the horizon constantly, her rifle always near, her eyes sharp. But her mind remained divided, half here, half in the past. At midday they reached a village. Small, worn, the kind of place caught between survival and surrender. Children watched from doorways, wide-eyed and silent. Women carried water with bowed shoulders. Men lingered in shadows, their expressions unreadable. Harris ordered the men to secure the perimeter. She moved through the narrow alleys, scanning windows, doors, rooftops. The village was quiet, too quiet. Then she saw him. Not in the open, not leading an ambush, but standing in the distance, half hidden by a crumbling wall, watching her. Her breath caught, her grip tightened. He didn't move, didn't raise his weapon. He just stood there, gaze fixed on her, waiting. And then slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand, not in threat, in greeting. Her heart pounded. She wanted to raise her rifle to end it here, but her hands betrayed her. They stayed still, locked in paralysis. He lowered his hand, turned, and disappeared into the maze of stone. She stood frozen, every nerve screaming, until Harris's voice cut through the air. "What is it?" She turned sharply. "Nothing." But it wasn't nothing, it was everything. That night, as the squad settled again, she pulled out the small photograph she kept hidden in her pack. The edges were worn, the colors fading. Two faces, side by side, both younger, both unscarred. One was hers, the other his. She traced the outline with her finger, a hollow ache rising in her chest. She had never told the squad, never told anyone, that once before everything fractured, before betrayal and war and silence, he had been hers. Her partner, her brother in arms, her love, and now her enemy. The realization clawed at her ribs, threatening to break her apart. But she pressed the photo back into her pack, buried it under gear, under layers of lies. Because tomorrow she would have to choose. The mission, or him, and she wasn't ready for either. The night air pressed heavy, laced with smoke from their small fires and the faint scent of dust that never seemed to leave. She lay on her cot with her rifle propped nearby, eyes open, unblinking, fixed on the canvas above her. The photograph in her pack felt like it weighed more than the rifle itself. Sleep didn't come. Not anymore. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him standing in that village, raising his hand, smiling across the scope. She saw the man she remembered and the man he had become, two ghosts inhabiting the same face. And she heard Harris's words replaying like a relentless drumbeat. If you hesitate again, people die. She turned over, pressing her palm against her chest, as if she could hold her heart still. But the pounding wouldn't stop. By dawn, the squad was already on their feet, gear packed, boots laced, faces grim. The village lingered behind them like a shadow. Children had waved as they left, but the smiles never reached their eyes. She carried those looks with her, as she always did. The silent accusations of innocence caught in a war it never asked for. Hours stretched on the march. The squad moved in staggered formation, their steps methodical, weapons ready. She trailed near the middle, scanning ridges, rooftops, every flicker of movement in the distance. Harris walked ahead, head low, shoulders tense. He hadn't said another word to her since the ridge, but his silence wasn't indifference. It was calculation. By midday, the land opened into a dry valley, rocks jutting like broken teeth. They paused, taking cover near a cluster of boulders. Radios hissed with faint signals. The word came, their target was near. Not just a camp, a stronghold, one that supplied the fighters ambushing convoys, feeding the war in whispers and shadows. And in that stronghold she knew was him. The squad prepared quietly, ammunition checked, radios tuned, breath steadied. Each man carried his own private ritual. She carried hers too, one last glance at the sky as though someone up there might still be listening. They moved in. The air thickened as they approached. Dust hung low, clinging to boots and throats. The silence deepened, broken only by the scrape of stone and the click of metal. Then a voice broke through. Not on the radio, not in memory, but clear, loud, undeniable. "Hold your fire." They froze. The voice came from ahead, near the stronghold, and though the words were aimed at his fighters, they struck her like a knife. It was him. Her lungs seized, her vision narrowed. Harris's hand shot up, signaling the squad to halt. His eyes swept the ridge, sharp, searching. He didn't recognize the voice, not the way she did. She stayed still, too still, praying the tremor in her chest didn't show on her face. Figures emerged from the stone structures ahead. Armed, steady, disciplined. Not a chaotic mob, trained fighters. They took positions but didn't fire. And then he appeared. Broad-shouldered, steady, his weapon slung casually but his presence commanding. He stepped into the open with the ease of someone who believed the ground itself belonged to him. His eyes swept the squad, cold, assessing, until they landed on her. And in that instant, the battlefield disappeared. It was just the two of them. Her breath caught. The weight of years pressed against her chest. Memories of nights spent whispering plans, of mornings where exhaustion melted into laughter, of promises made and broken. And then the day he left, without a word, without a trace. Now he stood here, enemy and ghost. Harris's hand tightened on his weapon. "Orders," one of the men whispered. But Harris didn't answer. His eyes flicked to her just for a second, and in that glance she saw the question unspoken. Why does he look at you like that? The silence stretched, the standoff deepened. Finally, he, the man she once loved, raised his voice again. You don't belong here. The words weren't for the squad, they were for her. Her throat tightened. She gripped her rifle harder, anchoring herself in the only certainty she had left. But she didn't answer, couldn't. Harris's gaze snapped between them, understanding dawning. Not fully, not yet, but enough. His jaw clenched, his eyes hardened. The moment shattered when a shot cracked from the ridge. One of the fighters panicked, fired too soon. Bullets tore through the air, the valley erupting in chaos. Her squad dove for cover, returning fire, the world exploding into dust and noise. She dropped low, scanning her scope, firing, moving, firing again. But through the haze, her eyes kept searching for him. And he was gone. The firefight raged, brutal and unrelenting. Stone shattered under impact, dust stung lungs, shouts drowned in the roar of weapons. Her shoulder burned from recoil, her throat raw from breath she didn't have. And still she couldn't shake it, that moment of silence, that look, that voice. When it was over, when the stronghold lay broken and the survivors scattered, the squad pulled back, battered but alive. Harris cornered her near the wreckage, his face smeared with dust, his voice low and sharp. You know him. It wasn't a question. She froze, her pulse hammering. No. Don't lie to me. Her chest ached, her lips parted, but the words wouldn't come. Harris leaned closer, his voice a hiss. He's leading them, and he's watching you. If you don't tell me why, I'll pull you off this mission myself. She wanted to deny it again, wanted to build the wall higher, stronger, but the cracks had spread too wide. So she whispered the truth. His name is Daniel. Harris's eyes narrowed, and she swallowed hard, the words tasted like ash, and once he was mine. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. Harris stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he turned away, jaw tight, hands clenched. When he spoke again, his voice was colder. Then you'd better decide, soldier, whose side you're on. The words struck deeper than any bullet. That night she sat alone, the photograph in her hands again. Daniel's younger face stared back at her, alongside her own. A memory frozen in time, untouched by betrayal, by war, by choices that carved scars too deep to heal. She traced the outline once more, her vision blurring. And for the first time in years, she let herself cry. Silent, shaking, broken. Not for the war, not for the mission, but for the man she once believed in. And for the woman she no longer recognized. The wind outside howled through the valley, rattling canvas and stone. She pressed the photo to her chest, closed her eyes, and whispered to the darkness. Why did you leave? The night gave no answer, only silence. The photograph stayed in her hands long after her tears had dried. By morning, her face showed no trace of it. Soldiers learn early how to bury their private battles, but inside, the fracture deepened. Daniel, his name had been a wound she never spoke aloud. Saying it to Harris had been like reopening it with a blade. The squad didn't know, not yet. Harris hadn't told them, but she felt the difference in his silence now. It wasn't the silence of discipline or command. It was the silence of doubt. They broke camp at first light. The valley stretched ahead, wide and barren. The kind of land that made you feel exposed, even with your rifle tight in your hands. Every step forward felt heavier, not because of the terrain, but because of the question pressing against her chest. What if Daniel wasn't gone when the shooting started? What if he appeared again? Would she be able to do what Harris expected? The thought churned her stomach. By midday, the squad reached a cluster of abandoned buildings, once a trading post before the war swept it empty. Windows shattered, walls pockmarked with gunfire, the scent of rust and decay heavy in the air. They swept through in silence, clearing room by room. Every sound was amplified, boots crunching broken glass, doors creaking open, the faint hum of the wind through bullet holes. She moved methodically, rifle raised back against cold stone. Training took over where emotion faltered. Each angle checked, each shadow pierced. But in one room she stopped. On the wall, scrawled in black paint, was a phrase in a language she knew only pieces of. But the meaning was clear enough. Freedom lives where fear dies. It was the kind of slogan fighters like Daniel would use. Not the ragged, desperate recruits, but the ones who believed they were building something greater. Her chest tightened. She ran her fingers across the faded paint, almost against her will. Harris's voice cut through behind her. "You recognize it." She froze. His shadow filled the doorway, his eyes sharp, unrelenting. "No," she said too quickly. Harris stepped closer. "Don't, not again. You said his name. That means you know more than you've told me. How deep were you with him?" Her throat closed. She gripped her rifle tighter, forcing her voice to steady. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me. It matters to this squad." Harris's tone was low, edged with steel. "If your past is walking into our missions, if he knows you, if he knows how you think, then it matters." She turned, meeting his eyes. For a moment her mask slipped. He wasn't supposed to be here. Harris studied her, reading the cracks in her face like a battlefield map. "But he is, and now we're in it, whether you're ready or not." Before she could answer, a shout came from outside. "Movement." Both of them snapped back into soldier mode. She bolted to the window, scanning the valley beyond. Dust clouds rose in the distance, vehicles, armored, moving fast. The squad rushed into defensive positions. Radios crackled. Orders flew. The trading post became a fortress in seconds, rifles aimed at the advancing threat. She steadied her scope. Through the haze she caught sight of figures riding atop the vehicles. Fighters, dozens of them. And among them, standing tall, commanding Daniel. Her chest seized. The sight of him in daylight, not through memory or shadows, shook her to the core. His posture, his gestures, the way fighters rallied around him, he wasn't just part of them. He was leading them. "Targets acquired," one of the squad muttered. Her finger hovered over the trigger. Her scope locked on his chest. One pull and it would be over. But she couldn't. Her vision blurred. The man in her scope wasn't just the enemy. He was the boy who once held her hand under starlight, who dreamed of escape, who swore he'd never leave her. Her chest rose and fell, breath ragged. Her fingers shook. "Take the shot," Harris barked from across the room. Her heart thundered. The rifle felt heavier than ever. But she didn't move. The firefight erupted before her hesitation was noticed. Bullets ripped into walls, glass shattered, stone crumbled. The squad returned fire, the post shuddering under the assault. She dropped low, firing at fighters, avoiding Daniel's line. She aimed for tires, for rifles, for anyone but him. The air filled with screams and smoke. Dust clung to sweat and blood. Her ears rang, her body recoiled, her mind fractured. Through it all, Daniel's voice rose above the chaos, shouting orders, steady, commanding, and every word cut her deeper. Finally, the squad broke through the assault. Explosions rocked the vehicles, fire lit the sky, fighters scattered. Survivors melted back into the dust, retreating into the endless desert. But Daniel remained untouched. From across the valley, his eyes met hers. And then he raised his hand, not in surrender, not in defiance, but in a silent gesture only she would understand. A memory, a signal, something from years ago when their world was different. And then he turned, disappearing with the others. The silence that followed was suffocating. The squad regrouped, battered, shaken, but alive. Harris's gaze burned into her like a brand. "You had him," he said coldly. "Why didn't you take it?" She opened her mouth, but no words came. The silence was her answer. Harris stepped closer, his jaw clenched, his voice low enough only she could hear. If your hesitation gets one of my men killed, I'll put you in the ground myself." The threat wasn't bluster, it was a promise. That night, as the squad set camp in the ruins, she sat alone, staring into the fire. The flames twisted, reaching skyward, consuming everything in their path. Her mind wandered back to before the war, to the first time she met Daniel. It was years ago, before uniforms and rifles defined her life. She had been younger, reckless, carrying more dreams than sense. Daniel had been the same. They met at a summer festival in a small town far from war. He was leaning against a fence, watching fireworks paint the sky. She was running from friends, laughing, her hair loose in the wind. Their eyes met by chance, or maybe fate. He had smiled. That easy, disarming smile that made the world feel lighter. They talked until the fireworks ended, until the night grew cold, until promises felt as simple as breathing. He told her about the stars, about leaving everything behind to chase something bigger. She told him about duty, about staying, about fighting for what mattered. Two paths, already diverging even then. But for a while they ran parallel, long walks under moonlight, letters tucked under doors, shared secrets whispered against time. Until the day he disappeared. No note, no explanation, just gone. She had searched, waited, hoped. Until the army became her anchor, her escape, her way forward. And now he was here, not as the boy she loved, but as the man she was ordered to kill. The fire snapped, pulling her back. Her chest ached with the weight of memory. She closed her eyes, whispering into the flames. "Why did you leave me?" No answer came. Only the crackle of fire, the shifting of wind, the quiet breathing of men who would never know the war she fought inside. And somewhere in the darkness, beyond the reach of firelight, she swore she could hear his voice again. Calling her name. The night pressed heavy over the ruins, a silence too thick to be trusted. Fires burned low, their embers glowing like tired eyes, and the squad lay scattered in uneasy sleep. But she couldn't close her own. Every time her eyes drifted, she saw him, not in memory anymore, but in the flesh. Daniel, alive, commanding, an enemy. Her hand still remembered the weight of the rifle, the way her finger had frozen on the trigger. That hesitation replayed in her mind, over and over, a silent accusation. "You could have ended it, but you didn't." She sat with her back against a broken wall, rifle across her knees, eyes on the desert beyond. The stars stretched endless above, indifferent, watching. Then movement. A shadow, not one of the squad, not close enough to attack, but there, watching. Her heart stuttered. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her rifle. Through the scope, the figure sharpened. It was him. Daniel. He wasn't aiming a weapon. He wasn't advancing. He just stood, outlined by moonlight, his hands visible, empty. And then he did it again, the same gesture as before, subtle, private, something from years ago, a promise only the two of them had once shared. Her stomach turned. She lowered the rifle but didn't look away. Daniel stayed only seconds longer, then melted back into the desert. She wanted to run after him, to demand answers, to scream at him, to touch him. But her body stayed still. Her loyalty held her in place like chains. When dawn came, Harris was waiting. He didn't need to ask what she had seen. It was written on her face. He cornered her before the others woke, his voice low but sharp. "He came to you." She stiffened. "You don't know that." "I know everything I need," Harris snapped. His eyes searched hers, unblinking. "You're compromised, and that compromise will get us all killed." Her throat tightened. "I'm not." "You are." His voice softened, but it cut deeper. "The question is whether you can cut yourself free in time." The squad moved again that morning, leaving the ruins behind, pushing deeper into the valley. Their mission was shifting now. Not just reconnaissance, not just resistance tracking. Harris's orders were sharp. Find Daniel, eliminate him. The weight of those words pressed harder on her chest with every mile. Her squad mates sensed the tension, even if they didn't know why. Jokes were quieter, glances sharper. Morales, usually loud, barely spoke. Even Singh, the youngest, watched her with suspicion when he thought she wasn't looking. Trust was thinning, and trust in their line of work was survival. By midday, they reached the river, or what had once been a river. Now it was little more than cracked earth, patches of stagnant water shimmering under relentless sun. The heat was suffocating, the air heavy with dust. The squad spread out, securing the area. She dropped to one knee, scanning the horizon through her scope. That's when she saw it. A marker. Small, subtle, stones stacked in a way that looked natural but wasn't. She recognized the pattern instantly. It was a signal, a call. From him. Her breath caught. She knew what it meant, come alone. She hesitated, her heart pounded. Harris was only steps away. If he saw it, if he understood, he'd never let her go. So she covered it with her boot, subtle, quick, and she prayed no one noticed. That night she slipped away. The squad was camped near the dried riverbed, exhausted, half asleep. She moved like a shadow, her steps quiet, her breath steady. Every part of her screamed against it. This is betrayal. But something stronger pulled her. A need for answers, a need for truth. The desert stretched endless, moonlight painting it silver. She followed the markers one by one, each place just where she would know to look. And then he was there. Daniel. He stood by an old tree, its branches twisted, its leaves long gone. His rifle slung behind his back, his eyes locked on hers. For a moment, neither spoke. The years between them filled the silence like an ocean. Finally she broke it, her voice cracked. Why? His answer was quiet. Because the world you fight for isn't the one I believe in. Her chest ached. You left me without a word. Daniel's face twisted, guilt flashing in his eyes. If I had told you, you'd have tried to stop me. Or worse, you'd have followed me. And I couldn't let you throw your life away. Anger surged in her. You think this life is mine by accident. You think I wear this uniform because of you. I chose this. Daniel stepped closer, his voice hardened. You chose chains, I chose freedom. Her hands trembled. Freedom doesn't slaughter villages. Freedom doesn't recruit children. Freedom doesn't burn the innocent. Daniel flinched but didn't retreat. War twists everything. You know that better than anyone. She wanted to scream, to strike him, to hold him. Instead, she whispered, I had you in my sights today. Daniel's eyes softened. I know, and you couldn't pull the trigger. The truth cut deeper than any lie. She closed her eyes, tears burning. Next time I might. Daniel's voice lowered, almost breaking. Then make sure it's clean, quick, don't make me suffer. Her eyes snapped open, shock flooding her. Daniel gave a sad smile, the kind that belonged to the boy she had once loved. I know what you are, and I know what I am, but between those truths there's still us. Her chest rose and fell, breath shallow. She wanted to say his name, to reach for him, to take one last piece of him with her. But the sound of footsteps shattered the moment. Harris. He emerged from the darkness, rifle raised, eyes burning with betrayal. I knew it. Her blood ran cold. Daniel moved instantly, slipping into shadow, vanishing before Harris could fire. She stood frozen, caught between them, guilt carved across her face. Harris's voice was venom. You're done. The return to camp was a blur. Harris didn't put her in cuffs, but his silence was worse. Every soldier could feel the rift now. By morning, Morales wouldn't meet her eyes. Singh muttered under his breath. Even the medic avoided her. Isolation had never felt so suffocating. And yet inside, something shifted. She realized Daniel wasn't the only reason her hands had shaken. It was what he represented. The life she might have lived, the path not taken, the freedom she denied herself when she chose loyalty over love. But now loyalty was fraying, and love was a wound that would never close. As the squad marched deeper into the desert, she knew the next confrontation would not be with Harris, or even with the squad. It would be with Daniel. The desert was endless. Sand and stone stretched into horizons that swallowed hope. Every mile under the burning sun stripped more from them: sweat, strength, trust. By the seventh day, silence had replaced conversation. Only commands and the occasional curse broke the monotony. She walked near the rear of the squad, rifle across her chest, helmet tilted low against the glare. Each step felt heavier than the last. Not from exhaustion. She had learned long ago how to endure that, but from the weight of eyes. Every man watched her differently now. Singh's glances carried suspicion. Morales's silence carried contempt. Even the medic who once treated her like a sister now treated her like a liability. And Harris's gaze never left her for long. He was testing her, pushing her, waiting for her to break. By nightfall, they reached the canyon. Its walls rose jagged and high, casting shadows that turned the air cold. Harris ordered them inside, setting up camp against the stone. The canyon offered protection, but it was also a trap. She felt it instantly. Her instincts, sharpened by years, screamed warning. The silence of the desert outside was too clean. The air was too still. As the squad set up, Harris pulled her aside. His voice was low, measured, as if every word had been rehearsed. "You'll take first watch," he said. She nodded, but his hand caught her arm before she could walk away. His grip was firm, his eyes unrelenting. "If he comes tonight," Harris whispered, "and you hesitate again, you won't live to see morning. Do you understand me?" Her jaw tightened. She didn't answer. Harris's grip tightened. "Do you understand me?" Finally, she forced the word out. "Yes." Harris released her. His silence was worse than any insult. The canyon grew darker. The squad drifted to sleep, their breath steady against the hum of wind through stone. She sat at the edge of camp, rifle steady, eyes scanning the shadows. And then movement. A flicker, a shape. Her heart quickened. She raised her scope. There he was. Daniel. Closer this time. Bolder. His figure half lit by moonlight, his face carved by shadow, his eyes locked on hers across the canyon. And for a moment, the world shrank to just them. He lifted his hand again, that same gesture, their old signal. But this time there was something different. Urgency, warning. Her pulse spiked. She glanced back at the squad, all asleep, unaware. Harris's back rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. When she looked again, Daniel was gone. Only the echo of his signal remained. Morning came with violence. The squad was ambushed at dawn. Gunfire exploded from the canyon walls, ricocheting off stone, shredding tents. Fighters poured from the cliffs above, shouting, firing, relentless. Chaos erupted. Men scrambled for cover, rifles blazing. Smoke filled the air. The canyon became a killing ground. She dropped low, firing at shadows, ears ringing with every blast. Sand and blood mixed under her boots. Morales cursed beside her, his face cut, his hand steady. Singh screamed orders that were swallowed by gunfire. And above them, on the ridge, Daniel. He was leading again, shouting commands, his rifle sharp and precise. Her heart wrenched, her scope locked on him. This time there was no hesitation. But as her finger tightened, she saw it, not his weapon, not his posture, but his eyes. He wasn't aiming at her squad. He was aiming away from them. Protecting them. Confusion ripped through her. Then she saw it. Another group of fighters, not Daniel, storming the canyon from the far side. The battlefield wasn't squad against fighters. It was fighters against fighters, and her squad caught between. Her mind reeled. Daniel wasn't leading the ambush. He was fighting against it. Why? The question tore at her, even as bullets screamed past her ears. Harris dove beside her, firing upward. His face was grim, his voice raw. "Take him out, do it now." Her chest heaved. Her scope framed Daniel again. He wasn't aiming at her. He was covering her flank. His bullets tore into the fighters closest to her position, cutting them down before they reached her. Her heart twisted. Harris's voice thundered, "Now." She froze. And in that pause, Daniel looked down at her, just for a heartbeat, a look that carried years, promises, betrayals, a look that said more than words ever could. Then he turned and vanished into the fight. The canyon roared with chaos. Explosions cracked, smoke blinded, screams cut short. The squad fought tooth and nail, every inch paid for with blood. By the time the dust settled, bodies littered the canyon floor. Some hers, some Daniel's enemies, some Daniel's own. And the squad, broken, battered, fewer now, stood barely standing. Singh was gone, morale's wounded. The medic sobbed quietly as he tried to stop bleeding that wouldn't stop. And Harris stood tall, his face carved from stone, his rifle still warm. His eyes found hers. "You had him again," Harris said, voice flat. "And again you let him go." She opened her mouth, but Harris raised his hand. Don't insult me with excuses. I saw him. He protected you. He protected us. Why?" The squad turned their eyes on her, every man waiting, every man demanding. Her throat closed. She had no answer that would keep her alive in their trust. Finally, she said the only truth she had. "I don't know." The silence that followed was worse than the gunfire. They buried Singh in the canyon. No words, just stone piled over his body, his rifle laid across it. The sun burned overhead, merciless, as the squad stood in silence. She stared at the grave, guilt hollowing her chest. Her hesitation hadn't killed Singh, but it hadn't saved him either. As the squad marched on, Harris walked beside her. His voice was quiet, dangerous. "You're finished after this mission. You know that, don't you?" She didn't answer. Harris's jaw clenched. "When the time comes, you'll prove your loyalty, or you'll die here." Her chest tightened. "And if loyalty isn't as simple as you think?" Harris's eyes cut to her, sharp as a blade. "Then you've already chosen your side." That night they camped on the ridge, overlooking the desert beyond. The squad slept in restless silence, haunted by the canyon. She sat alone, staring into the horizon, the wind cold against her face. And then a whisper. Her name. She turned sharply. Daniel stood at the edge of the ridge, closer than ever, his face shadowed, his voice low. "You don't understand," he said. "It's not what it looks like." Her chest ached. "Then tell me what it is." Daniel's eyes burned with urgency. "They're using me. My fighters aren't mine anymore. I'm fighting them from inside. That's why I couldn't walk away. That's why I had to let you see me." Her breath caught. "Why me?" His voice broke. "Because I still trust you, even after everything, even now." Tears stung her eyes. She hated him. She loved him. She wanted him gone. She wanted him safe. Before she could answer, Harris's voice cut from the shadows. "Step away from him." Daniel's eyes widened. Harris emerged, rifle raised, face grim. The squad stirred awake, rifles lifting, eyes narrowing. Daniel raised his hands, but his gaze stayed locked on her. Harris's voice thundered, "Choose, right now, him or us." The world held its breath. Her chest rose and fell, caught between two loyalties, two lives, two truths that could not coexist. Her finger curled against the trigger. And for the first time she knew, whichever choice she made, it would break her. ChatGPT said. She stood still, as if frozen in the moment, though everything around her was moving. The distant echo of boots, the muted hum of machinery, the faint hiss of radios, all blurred into a backdrop she barely heard. For her, there was only silence. Not the kind that comforted, but the kind that pressed against her chest, forcing her to breathe slower, deeper, as if each breath carried the weight of all that had passed. The mission was complete. That was what the report would say. Objectives achieved, threats neutralized, team accounted for. On paper, it would read like success. But the truth of it lingered in the hollow spaces between words, in the faces that wouldn't appear in the debriefing room, in the eyes she couldn't forget. She walked out into the daylight, blinking against the sudden wash of sun. The world looked too normal, too indifferent. A child laughed somewhere beyond the base fence. The smell of fresh bread drifted from a market stall just down the road. Life carried on, unaware of the things that had just unfolded in the shadows. She wanted to reach out, to grab someone, to tell them. But what? That the silence they enjoyed came at a cost they'd never see. That peace wasn't a gift, but a debt someone else paid in blood. Her hands trembled, though she quickly tucked them into her pockets. No one could see that. Not here. Not after everything. Strength wasn't what she showed in the field. It was what she showed afterward, in the quiet moments when weakness tried to surface. She had learned long ago that the world respected silence more than screams. A voice called her name. She turned, and there he was, the commander who had doubted her at the beginning. His face, carved with lines of exhaustion, carried something softer now. Respect, maybe, or regret. It was hard to tell. He walked closer but didn't speak at first. They just stood there, two soldiers bound by something words could never quite capture. Finally, he nodded just once. And somehow that was enough. She thought of her father then, the man whose silence had been his strength, whose shadow had followed her into every decision. She wondered what he would think now, if he'd understand why she had chosen this path, why she had endured what she did. She hoped he would see that she hadn't sought glory, only a kind of justice. The team gathered slowly, each with their own shadows to carry. Some joked too loudly, trying to bury the ache beneath laughter. Others stared at the ground, avoiding eyes as if guilt could be hidden in silence. She watched them, felt their weight as much as her own. These were not just comrades, they were fragments of herself, pieces of a story that would never make headlines, never be told in full. And yet, in their presence, there was something unspoken, a dignity, not in medals or speeches, but in the simple act of surviving, of standing together after everything tried to break them apart. That night she sat alone on the edge of her bunk, listening to the low murmur of voices from down the hall. She opened her notebook, the one she carried but rarely used. For a long time the page stayed blank. Then slowly, carefully, she wrote one line. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed the notebook, set it aside, and lay back, staring at the ceiling. The silence no longer pressed so hard against her chest. It lingered, yes, but softer now, more like a companion than an enemy. The mission was over. The scars would remain. But so would the quiet strength she had found, the kind that didn't demand recognition, didn't need applause. Outside, the night was still. The stars above looked no different than they had before. Yet to her they carried meaning now. They were silent too, but their silence wasn't emptiness. It was presence, a reminder. And when she closed her eyes, she carried that with her, knowing that some stories don't end with triumph or defeat. They end with something quieter, something more enduring. A silence that lingers, a dignity that acts, a truth that needs no words. The screen would fade to black here. The music would soften, almost vanish, leaving only the echo of those final words. And for the viewers, long after the video ended, a single image would remain. Her figure, standing tall in daylight, nothing extraordinary about her stance, except the unshakable weight of resilience that clung to her like a shadow. That was the ending, not loud, not triumphant, but unforgettable.